Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of FSB Wales, I would like to welcome you all to this special pre-election debate. This is an important event for us at FSB Wales, and I would like to thank the very senior politicians on our panel for attending tonight. We have been planning for this event for several months, and I don't think that any of us expected it to be held against the backdrop of the very concerning news for the Welsh steel industry that we heard last night. I know that our thoughts are with all those concerned about their livelihoods as a result of last night's announcement by Tata. Some of those are staff directly employed by the steelmaker. Others are involved in the supply chain that serves the steel industry in Wales, a supply chain which includes a number of FSB member businesses. Beyond that, there are many small businesses in communities such as Port Talbot, Llanwern and Shotton here in North Wales that rely on the business that well-paid steel jobs bring to their community. Indeed, the news of last night serves to underline how the impact of events in business and the economy is felt by ordinary people the length and breadth of Wales. The success of our businesses and our economy is essential to the success of Wales and the well-being of individual households. The next Welsh Government will need to be prepared for a variety of challenges across a range of industries, but there will also be a range of opportunities, and the next Welsh Government needs to ensure that businesses in Wales are well placed to seize those opportunities. With that in mind, I'm sure that we will all be extremely interested to see what our panel has to say tonight on the vision and policies that they have for the Welsh economy over the next 5 years. And all that now remains is for me to pass you over to our debate chair, BBC Wales business correspondent Brian Meechan, to introduce our panel and get the debate underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Well, we have a panel of esteemed politicians here with us tonight. We have Andrew R.T. Davies, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Edwina Hart, the Economy Minister, speaking on behalf of Labour. We have the Welsh Liberal Democrats, leader Kirsty Williams. We have Leanne Wood, the leader of Plaid Cymru, and Mark Reckless from UKIP. The format we're going to take is the questions will come from the audience, and we will put questions directly to the politicians, and hopefully there will be a sparky, lively and interesting debate amongst them. Knowing them, I'm sure there certainly will be. So without further ado, we have sort of moved things around ever so slightly because of course, the incredible news that came from Tata yesterday. So we're going to have our first question from David Wilkinson, who is in the audience, I think, just over here. David, can we have your question?
Thank you. David. Welcome to Wrexham, everybody.
When you get your question, if you just wait for us to get the microphone to you, that would be great.
Yesterday's announcement by Tata is the latest chapter in the steep decline in the Welsh steel industry since the Welsh Assembly was created. Why should we believe that a future government led by your party would improve on this record?
Well, I have to say that it's actually nothing to do with the Welsh Assembly government. Steel is an international issue. There's a global crisis in steel. There's massive production coming out of China with a slowing Chinese economy. And there are issues about the steel industry and the way that it has been run historically. So in terms of government, we've got to look at what the UK government have attempted to do and haven't done as well. In terms of the UK government, we've been lobbying quite heavily for a long time about energy-intensive industries, because one of the key concerns that was raised by Tata Steel with us and other steelmaker was the cost of energy within the UK. The government have now acted. There is a scheme in, but it's probably a little too late. There's also the issue of the rate of the pound as well has also been there. And of course, we go to the issue of dumping. And there has been a lot of dumping from China. There's a lot of dumping now, of course, from Russia as well in terms of dumping of steel. So that has been a major issue across the piece. So in terms of what the Welsh government can do, we're having close discussions and have been for the last few months with the UK government, with the European Commission, and all options are there to look and discuss. We're very closely aligned with the trade unions in terms of the discussions that they want. And our duty now is almost to rise above politics politics on this issue. It's actually about jobs, it's about the economy. And I think as Janet, when she opened this debate this evening, said, it's about people in these communities. Because when steel jobs go, what else happens? We've only got to look at the long history of what happened when coal mining worked. Those communities were devastated. When steel closures happened up here in years and years ago, that devastated communities. It's taken a long time to come up. So we work as a government with the UK government to seek solutions. There are a lot of discussions going on. Tarta's indicated they want a buyer, so we now have to look to that. There's also been discussions about whether there should be public buy-in, because in Europe, the Italians took over a couple of steel plants, then they sold them on, or they agreed to sell them. So all these are issues that are being discussed currently. So I don't accept that the steel has declined as a result of a Labour government since 1999. Market forces prevail, global capitalism prevails, and the steel industry has been badly affected by all those issues.
Andrew R.T. Davies, your party is in government in the UK. What do you expect them to do about it, and what would you be doing about it in the Assembly?
Well, I've been speaking to colleagues in Westminster today, and I was with the Secretary of State this afternoon, and we're committed to making sure that steel is part of a critical balance of the UK economy and is there for the long term, not some short-term fix, but some medium to long-term fix that secures the jobs and secures the capacity of steel making within the United Kingdom. It's vital now that both governments work together to make sure that the space and stability is created, that a sensible and organised sale can be undertaken of the assets of Tata Steel. We know that for a fact that Tata Steel have put these assets on the market, and now what is required is security for potential buyers to have confidence that they can look at the assets, they can look at the books, and they can bid accordingly. And there are takeovers going on across the globe, and indeed here in the UK with Liberty Steel, for example, purchasing assets in Scotland. If it is the role of UK government for a short period of time to take a stake in Tata Steel, then I am not against that, and I think the UK government have ruled nothing off the table to make sure that that space is created so that those negotiations can be undertaken. The rebate on energy prices has been put in place by the Chancellor. That is a vital component of a successful recovery for the steel industry. Business rates is something obviously that is within the gift of the Welsh Government, and there hasn't been substantive movement on that, and I regret that fact, and I hope that Carwyn Jones and the current Welsh Government can make some positive announcements on that to give some comfort to would-be purchasers. But above all, there is the dumping of cheap steel, not just coming from China, but from other countries as well. But we have to be careful that we don't end up then in a tit-for-tat tariff war, that just down the road from here, for example, Airbus wings are made, and if we start putting tariffs on steel, ultimately, will the Chinese then suddenly stop taking Airbus planes, which will have a knock-on effect in other sectors? It is wrong that production costs are slashed in countries that have no competitive floor in place, and it is more of a social policy, such as in China, where they keep employment in the steelworks. And I do think it is legitimate to put in measures that make sure our steel industry is protected, but it needs to be done on a constructive basis so that you don't end up in tit-for-tat tariffs that end up shutting off other industries from valuable export markets. But let's be crystal clear. There is a future for steel making within the United Kingdom. There's a future for steel making in Wales, and I will work tirelessly with colleagues of any political colour, but importantly with my colleagues in government in Westminster, to make sure that future is secured.
Mark Reglis, what will UKIP do in the Assembly for the steel industry?
Well, what UKIP would like to see is safeguarding for the steel industry, at least through the referendum we are having on the 23rd of June. There are clearly global factors in terms of overcapacity, but there are also very significant European factors. And we find it hard to paint a sustainable future for steelmaking in Wales and the UK, while we A, have artificially sky-high energy prices, and B, we don't have the protection from the cheap Chinese steel dumping. If we vote to leave on the 23rd of June, we can reclaim our seat on the World Trade Organization, and we ourselves, as the UK, can apply anti-dumping tariffs to Chinese steel. The US have been doing that for almost 18 months, in some categories at over 200%. EU acted barely a month ago, and mainly it's 9% on some categories up to 25%, but it's giving no significant protection against those dumping of cheap Chinese sort of imports. And unless we as the UK take back power to do something about it, I fear that it's going to be very difficult to get through the next couple of years. Ultimately, we also need to get energy prices down. Just a few miles up valley from Port Talbot, we have the best steel in Wales, perhaps in the world, and yet that's not allowed to be used. The The European Union has shut those coal plants under its Large Combustion Plants Directive, and the UK government is banning the construction of new ones, despite them building them in Germany under its emission performance standards. We need to
Kirsty
get energy
Williams.
prices down, and we need protection from Chinese steel. We can only do that as an independent United Kingdom.
Kirsty Williams, your party was in power during this period that we were talking about with the high energy prices. Edwina, Hart, Mark Reckless have both mentioned those prices. Can you respond to the question?
Certainly, and when we were in the Westminster government, Vince Cable on a number of occasions visited Port Talbot to talk to the management about the difficulties that the industry was facing then, but those difficulties have grown exponentially over the last 12 months. The gentleman said, you know, is it the fault of devolution that we've ended up in this situation? The reality is, if you look back to the 1960s, tens of thousands of men worked in the Talbot Works. I grew up looking out of my bedroom window at Trostre Works. My godfather worked in Trostre, my next door neighbour worked in Trostre, the man next door but one worked in Trostre. But those jobs have constricted and constricted and constricted over a number of years. And I think if we're being fair and open-minded about this, you know, the steel industry has faced a number of challenges over the last 50 or 60 years. The question is now, is it conceivable for us to allow the remainder of the British steel industry and the Welsh steel industry to go to the wall? I don't think it is. It is an industry of national strategic importance, which gives us more flexibility within the World Trade Organization and within the EU to take the action we need now to protect those jobs and to protect those communities. Because if those jobs go, those communities will never be the same again. And you can put measures in place, just like the Welsh Government tried to do in Ebbw Vale. But if you go to Ebbw Vale on a regular basis, you'll see that that community is yet to recover, despite tens of thousands, millions actually, of Welsh Government money going into that community. So what can we do? The Welsh Government can do things. It can do things about business rates. I would love to see the Welsh Government use its power over business rates to abolish business rates on plant and machinery. I think we need to really valuing our manufacturing industry, and we could do something about business rates, and the Welsh Government could do that. We could create an enterprise company. When the steelworks went in Newport, that was done in Newport. We've got no plans to do that so far in Port Talbot, and we could do that. Now here, of course, in North Wales, the issue is what happens to the 800 plus jobs in Shotton. Now my understanding is Shotton is the only part of the Tata operations in Britain that is a profitable business. What's going to happen to Shotton? Is it going to be sold off on its own, or are they going to insist on that being part of a wider package? Shotton's got some very, very innovative production methods and the kind of work that they do there. That has got to be protected, and we've got to have a discussion about, does that form part of the overall sell-off, or can we do something separate for Shotton? We do need the UK government to take its foot off the brake with regards to anti-dumping measures. There are over 37 anti-dumping measures that the EU has already brought in. 16 or 17 of them are to do with China, but we could do more in that regard. And the government has to consider being the lender of last resort. When we faced the banking crisis, we were told that they were too big to fail. I would suggest to you that the Welsh steel industry is too big to fail, and we need to do what we did for the banking industry and put our money where our mouth is. Somebody said to me on Twitter today, I was a disgrace for saying that, and that we should not be spending taxpayers' money on subsidising people's jobs. Well, I can tell you this, we've spent taxpayers' money on a lot worse things than that, and I'm prepared to carry on using taxpayers' money to support those jobs.
I'm going to bring you in, Leanne, as well, but this is obviously a debate about the Assembly elections. It's not a debate about the EU referendum. There is a European dimension to this question, this question, though. So, Leanne, could you answer the gentleman's question, but also speak about the European side as well from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think that manufacturing industry has not been a priority for governments for many years now. And I grew up in the Rhondda, and that was during the 1980s when we lost another significant industry. And I can tell you that 3 decades later, and I know that in these parts there was coal industry too, we're still feeling the effects in those communities of losing that industry back in the 1980s. So I've got a very clear idea of how big the steel industry and how important and vital it is to the Welsh economy, and how we must do everything we can to try to safeguard those jobs, because it's not just about those jobs, it's about the knock-on effect to the whole community. My dad was working in a builder supply merchants yard during the 1980s, but when they shut the coal pits, nobody had any money to buy builder supplies anymore, so he was made redundant, and there are hundreds if not thousands of people who are in a similar situation. So doing nothing is not an option. I have to say about the European referendum point, though, it's the Tories that are lobbying the European Commission for China to have market economy status, which prevents the ability to impose tariffs, decent tariffs on Chinese steel. So even were we to pull out of the EU, we would still have a Tory government in Westminster, and so they would still be of the ideological position that they are currently now. So I don't accept that being in or out of the EU would make any difference on this. 2 months ago, my party, Plaid Cymru, said that we should consider all options in relation to the future of the steel industry, including the nationalisation of the industry, whether that be on a temporary or a longer-term basis. At that time, we were ridiculed. We were told that we were fantasists. So it's really encouraging to see today that even the Tories are not ruling out the nationalisation of our steel industry. And my final point is about the one with the banks. We were told the banks were too big to fail. Well, the steel industry is too big to fail in Wales, and if it's good enough for the banks, and if it's within the EU rules to bail out the banks, then it's got to be the same for steel as well.
I just want to bring in, because there were a couple of points made by the panel about business rates, and they have been devolved fairly recently. They've been devolved. Is there any movement on business rates that can happen for the steel industry?
Well, business rates, of course, state aid rules start to apply with regards to business rates as well. Everything you do in relation to steel, state aid rules apply from Europe. And state aid rules are an absolute nightmare. We could do a de minimis, but I can assure you now Tata weren't interested in de minimis in real terms. So the discussions that we're all talking about now are the ones that are absolutely vital. It is how will Tata be selling their assets is key, because they've got very profitable assets and there will be people taking them on. I concur absolutely with Kirsty's points about North Wales and what's going on there. Marvellous manufacturing facility, good order books and a very good brand that could actually be marketed. So it'll be a decision by Tata about how they deal with these issues. Then there'll be a decision which the UK government is looking at closely, is what type of support can you come for anybody to come in, because you realise there are big environmental issues with steel plants if they close, etc., that have to be rectified. So all that's subject to a very quite high-level ongoing dialogue between the company and the UK government and ourselves to look at the appropriate solutions. And we've got to say, what value is Tata? So if Tata's losing £1 million a day in Port Talbot, it will lose £1 million a day even if the public purse takes it over. So you've got to look at how you refocus the business to make it into a profitable business. And the issue then is, what type of business do we want for the future? Because it's not just steel we're talking about defence, manufacturing and all those issues. One thing I will take issue with, we've absolutely key as a government supported manufacturing in Wales. The manufacturers will tell you that we've got an excellent relationship with manufacturers in Wales, because as a government we are pro-business because we're pro-employment. So we have had a manufacturing strategy, we have wanted to know what we wanted to do. But this is an issue now I think that we've all got to discuss, can see what can come best out of it. But I can assure you we're going to fight for every job, because it's about our nation, and the steelmaking process is not just about Wales, it's about the UK. You cannot have a nation in the so-called first world, as it were, that doesn't have steel making, and that's the fight that we've got to do to make sure we can preserve those jobs and that industry and future-proof it, because it's got to be an industry that's fit for purpose to take on the world, because we produce some of the finest steel in the world, and we've got to ensure that we can export it, but also more importantly that we can keep our home markets, because there are people that choose to buy cheaper imported steel. I understand perhaps the rationale on their books, but at the end of the day I think there's something about buying Welsh, buying British, and rather like the Americans do, buy America.
Okay, well, we've spent a bit of time on this question because it is incredibly important, not just to Tata and the steel industry, but as Janet said, the whole supply chain that's involved in that. But we'll take another question now, and that comes from David Lewis, who I think is over here. And we'll just get the microphone to you as well.
Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, panel. What are the future plans for investment in Wales? other than the M4 corridor and D-side.
So, Kirsty Williams, let me start with you. What are the Liberal Democrats' priorities if you are elected to the next Assembly on investment outside of that M4 corridor and D-side? I have to say we had a number of quite similar questions to this tonight, so it's a pertinent issue.
I think it is, especially if the Welsh Government was to use the vast majority of its new borrowing powers to deliver a single project in a single part of the country. I think if we look at 17 years of devolution and the promises that those of us made to people when we campaigned to create the institution, we said that we were going to create an institution that would work for the whole of Wales. And I think, you know, if we're honest, and I believe wholeheartedly in devolution, has that delivered? I think there are large tracts of Wales that fail, that Cardiff Bay hasn't delivered for them. And in fact, Cardiff Bay has been no better at listening to their concerns and helping them realise their aspirations than London ever would. And as someone who represents a big part of mid Wales, we feel that we're sandwiched between a northeast corner that seems to do very well and the southeast corner that seems to do very well, and we're stuck in the middle. So we would not spend that money on the proposed black route. We think we do need to do something around congestion on the M4 corridor in the Newport area, but we don't need to go ahead and spend all that resources on the black route. We would like to see us develop the Welsh economy. You guys know more than anybody that Wales is a nation primarily of small businesses with some high-profile large companies. If we're to create sustainability and try and build resilience so that we're not subject to the great shocks like we've seen over Port Talbot, we have got to help those small businesses become medium-sized businesses, because that helps build resilience within our economy. We think that the way in which Welsh Government engages with small business is not as good as it could be, and we'd like to see a small business administration set up. We think we need a greater focus on economic development by local authorities. Councils often have very anti-business practices in their own local authority area, which make things difficult for small businesses to grow. So we'd like to see that. In terms of capital investment, we do want to see improvements on the A55. You guys would know better than I do. You know, only last week we had the tanker that caused hours and hours and hours of disruption on that route. We want to see investment in rail infrastructure into Manchester, Liverpool, and those parts of England. And we want to see us using our borrowing powers to have a revolution in house building, because we know that we have a housing crisis in Wales. Parts of our construction industry are still on the floor, and we think that there's a legitimate role for government to be investing in substantial amounts of house building so that we can solve our housing crisis. So there's lots to be done, but we are very cognizant of the fact there is life outside of Newport and Cardiff. There is life outside Deeside, as important as that is, and I know many people travel across the North Wales Beltway to get jobs there, but we have to look at having a balanced regional approach to economic development, something I think that has been sadly lacking over the last 17 years.
Leanne Wood, what is your plan for outside of these areas that are really booming? They have a really strong economy, but what's your ideas for investments as a party if you were elected?
Well, we've been very critical of the government's decision to blow its entire borrowing capacity on 15 miles of road around Newport. I'm not saying that the congestion problem shouldn't be dealt with, but there are cheaper options, and the blue route is the one that we've come out with, which would free up £600 million out of that borrowing pot for investment in infrastructure in other parts of the country. And we know, don't we, that the A55 needs upgrading, that we need to invest in rail. Let's reverse some of those cuts that were implemented by Meechan back in the 1960s. Digital communications, digital infrastructure needs investing in. There shouldn't be a single business in Wales operating offline in this day and age. Energy infrastructure, schools and housing, there's plenty of work that needs doing, and that is why in our manifesto in the election you'll see that we propose setting up a National Infrastructure Commission for Wales to work with the private sector to borrow money at rates which are historically at an all-time low to invest in those infrastructure projects. We also want to introduce legislation to rebalance public spending throughout the country. So, for example, 17% of infrastructure spending, capital spending, takes place in the north of this country, while 22% of the population live here. So we want to make it law that when governments spend money, that it's done in an equal way, geographically distributed right throughout the country. So those are some of the ideas specifically that would help the economy in those areas furthest away from the southeast.
Edwina Hart, do you want to answer that
I'll
point?
speak as a Swansea girl and a West Walian then on this occasion, because the world actually doesn't end at Cardiff. I can assure you that it does do it to West Wales. And when you in North Wales say that you haven't had enough expenditure, you've actually got more expenditure per head actually on transport policies than elsewhere in Wales. And as a West Walian, I have the similar reasons. Now, there's been a lot of criticism about the M4, but I'm a supporter of the M4 relief road. I think the Black Route is the right road. The Chancellor kindly gave us advanced borrowing to be able to actually undertake the route, and the proposal's going ahead. There will be a public inquiry, something could happen after that, but we are very committed to the M4, as is the CBI and others, but ensuring we have a free flow down from Newport to actually bring jobs further west.
But
in terms of some of the interest... Well, perhaps, Leanne, but I don't think so. At the end of the day, we've got to look at some other issues as well that you've actually spoken about. You talk about rail. Rail actually isn't evolved to us yet, and we've made enormous strides in terms of what we've done in areas of Wales of improving routes, putting the Assembly's money in at the end of the day when we didn't have to. And people will tell you about the improvements there are in routes in terms of rail. Also as well, when people ask us about public transport, they want us to integrate it. We're not responsible yet for bus regulation. When we have that, you can then have integrated things that go on. And we are looking keenly at what we'll do with the new rail franchise and how we will improve services, and that's been quite innovative. But one of the key areas for me is it's important to have investment across the piece, and we are doing the A55, we're looking at other crossings to Ynys-Môn, but also as well, one of the key issues that we have improved, I think, for small businesses particularly, is looking at procurement policies, because procurement is a very big issue for small businesses. Can they actually get into the procurement area? Some small businesses successfully have joined large projects, and there's a job of work to do there, and Jane has been very successful in revising procurement rules. In fact, the UK government followed us on, and now is the opportunity for smaller business to be in the procurement process. So we'll certainly got the opportunities in Wrexham with the new prison, we've got the opportunities with nuclear, and we're doing a lot of work with smaller businesses to get them into that area. So as a government, we're actually committed for investment all across Wales. When you look at the National Transport Financial Plan, you can see the investment across Wales, and if Kirsty says anything, we've done quite a lot in Powys, as it were, because I'm forever visiting schools, safe routes in Powys, and looking for improvements. So there's an awful lot going on there, and there's an awful lot going on across Wales with the improvements in West Wales. But there's a limit to the amount of cash you got in terms of capital you got for expenditure, and I can blame Andrew R.T. Davies on my left in his government in Westminster for the cuts on that.
I will bring Andrew R.T. Davies in to answer that in a second, but first, Mark Reckless, what are your plans for investment outside of the M4 corridor and D-side?
Well, to take North Wales, we are very keen to see improvements to the A55 corridor, particularly in terms of the resilience. We want to support electrification of the North Wales main line, and I just don't think we can rely on Network Rail for all that. I think the Welsh Government should actually look at bringing in someone else to advise on the feasibility of possible costs on that. I think North Wales in particular, we need to link in with the UK Government's ideas, at least, for a northern powerhouse, and recognise that much of what happens in South Wales also then links back into the south of England, be that back Bristol or further to London. So we don't support the idea of a Wales Infrastructure Commission focusing only on Wales-wide projects. We need to recognise the economic geography of Wales and the links between North Wales and Northern England, and similarly along the M4 corridor to the south. What we really believe in terms of the economic development is that it is not best done by civil servants in Cardiff and Cathays Park. What we would like to do, and this is actually a policy of the Federation of Small Business, an excellent policy, is to devolve economic development down from the Assembly and Welsh Government to local councils across Wales, but at the same time to give that statutory duty to promote economic development. Because actually I think some of the councils do have very good ideas about what they want to do in terms of economic development. I'll go ahead, but they don't have the capital to do that. So like Plaid, we support the blue route. We think the black route is a monstrous waste of money. Just this morning there was an exhibition at Leanne Town Hall. There's stuff just going out all over the place around Newport in terms of public exhibitions and spending. And I'd question, with only 30 seats, how Labour done that unless it was the Liberal Democrats who actually went along and allowed them to have that spending. We think much of that 600 million that we would save by going for Professor Stuart Cole's blue route rather than the black route to relieve the M4 should be devolved to local councils to support the strongest capital projects they have for driving economic development in their region. And I think people in North Wales know a lot better how to do that for North Wales than do civil servants
Can I
and
make a
politicians.
point about the exhibitions?
Very
We do
quickly,
exhibitions all the time. That's what we do in terms of public consultation. Mark Reckless is saying it's wrong to consult with the public. Well, when you just say it, because at the end of the day, we've got to show what we're trying to do on these particular issues. And as for rail electrification, the business case has been just cleared my desk. We're going full speed ahead. We've got our links into north of England, and Cardiff and Newport have got their links now into Bristol. So all that work is alluded to has actually been done. And as for local authorities, they have a role in economic development, but we've got some very successful enterprise zones, including D-side around here, that are actually doing the business with business on their boards, with academia on their boards, actually doing the work that you want done. It's not all done by civil servants in
You should not
Cardiff.
be wasting all this money on the black route, putting all this spending on it when you don't even have a majority in the Assembly. Even within your own party, there is significant opposition to this ridiculous waste of money on a £1 billion+ project, tying up the whole and more of the capital budget for the whole of Wales, when there's a far cheaper and actually far quicker option in the blue route that would give us relief in South East Wales, as well as saving money for the rest of Wales to invest in projects.
Let's bring in Andrew R.T. Davies, who has been waiting patiently for his with his ideas on investment for outside the M4 corridor and D-side.
Well, I think what's important to recognise is that as the UK, we have the fastest growing economy of all developed markets. And ultimately, if you want investment in infrastructure, if you want investment in economic development, you have to have a strong economy delivering economic growth. And that has actually happened over the last couple of years, and that will continue under the stewardship of the UK government in Westminster. What's important now, in my view, is to devolve as much economic power out of Cardiff as possible. And we as a government would be doing that. And like in North Wales, for example, the announcements we made at our Llangollen conference was about setting up the infrastructure here, that North Wales would take responsibility for economic development for projects in North Wales, because economic links in Wales are east to west, west to east. They're not north to south. And ultimately, we need to be plugging into the northern powerhouse. And Alan Keynes today was chairing an economic forum here in North Wales. In the first 5 days of his role as Secretary of State, he's up here in North Wales making sure that the UK government are fully engaged with local authorities, but importantly, businesses as well, because businesses drive economic growth. And to me, and my line of thinking, if I was ever to be First Minister, would be, does it make money? Wales and the Welsh economy has got to start making money, because if it starts making money, it starts creating quality jobs. If it starts creating quality jobs, it gets decent take-home pay. And ultimately, the cycle continues, and we strengthen our position. So from our position as Conservatives, we would be investing in devolution of responsibilities down to local communities, and in particular here in North Wales. And in particular, we'd be looking at business rates and the devolution of business rates as well, because ultimately, we believe that could be a vehicle for creating a stream of revenue here in the north that could invest in projects. And one of the first policies we brought forward was to revamp Finance Wales, that in my view has failed to make finance available to small and medium-sized businesses. And what we would be doing is setting up regional banks, a policy we announced in 2012, that would deal with businesses that do have problems raising finance on the normal markets, the credit markets, and investing in those businesses to bring new products to the market, or to develop ideas that would create economic capacity that creates directly into economic regeneration of areas. And that's the role of government. The role of government isn't to centralise power, it's to push power out to communities and to businesses and to individuals, because you're the people who understand what you require in your businesses and your economic areas, such as North Wales here. The electrification of North Wales line is a vital ingredient for the next financing of the rail network, and that's from 2019 to 2024, and it is vital that as Welsh Conservatives...
I'm going to have to interrupt you. If I can there, because I'm just trying to get as many questions in as we can. I'm going to be stricter now on all of you. Very, very briefly, could you come back in, Kirsty?
I think we need to be very, very careful when we're talking about devolving entire responsibility for economic development to 22 local authorities here in Wales. Undoubtedly, there is a greater role for them in parking policy, waste collection. There's obviously a role and impact they have on local businesses. But to say that they're going to be responsible for international trade development is fanciful, to say the least. And secondly, can I just say about devolving business rates? You can devolve a proportion of business rates, but
I think we're going to come on to business. We're going to come on to business rates. So should we leave?
Hold on.
All you're going to do.
There's a point of clarification. The Conservative policy is not about developing inward investment. It's about economic development and local economic development that will be done under a regional infrastructure board. That was announced at our party conference in Llangollen. And Edwina did challenge me on the savings, the cutbacks, call them what you will, that the UK government has made to the budget so that we can bring down the deficit. It is a fact, under the Comprehensive Spending Review in November, an additional £900 million was made available for capital spending over the next 3 years, the life of the Comprehensive Spending Review, and that's available to the incoming Welsh Government to invest in capital projects the length and breadth of Wales. And you can only make that money available if you have a strong economy to raise that money through taxation and raise through economic activity. And that's what we've got to be doing, is working with the UK Government in partnership to develop those economic links that are so important here in North Wales.
Okay, we're going to have to move on, I think, to the next question. This one is coming from Swansea, actually. We've got our live link up with the people who have been watching there. So this is from Mark Hooper at Swansea.
Good evening, Brian. That's what I thought. We hear a lot about how well we've managed to attract foreign direct investment into Wales. Significant public funds are often required to attract these companies, but any wealth created by the investment ends up disappearing overseas. What plans do you have to develop the wealth-creating enterprises that are rooted and grounded here in Wales?
Okay, so we'll go first to Leanne Wood. I mean, what plans do you have for the sort of homegrown businesses, if you like?
I think that foreign direct investment is, of course, a vital important part of the Welsh economy, but I'm not sure that we've got the balance right in the past between the amount of effort we've put into trying to attract new companies to come here as opposed to investing in the ones we've got here already. One of the ideas that my party has put forward is instead of giving grants or loans to companies who look promising and could be very successful startup companies, we want to instead take an equity stake in those companies so that, as the point that was just made, when you invest as a government in a company, you want to see some sort of return on your investment. And that investment would be then, by the successful companies, would be reinvested back to benefit everybody in Wales who would have been investing in that company through the taxpayer process in the beginning. So we think that policy would enable us to have, as a government, a return on our investment, which we would then want to prioritise into education, skills and the further education sector, which has seen massive cuts over the last few years and almost 50% of part-time courses have been lost. So we would want to reinvest back in those courses to enable people to continue their education while they're in work.
And Mark Reckless, let me ask you what UKIP's plans are in this area, how you would approach that balance, I guess, between foreign direct investment and homegrown companies.
I think the education that Leanne mentions, I think, is a good point. And I think in Wales we're a significant net exporter of higher education, and we have more students from England coming here than vice versa. And I think actually supporting that research and development and encouraging those graduates to stay in Wales is crucial, and that's something that UKIP's been thinking about very hard, and we will be releasing our ideas in our manifesto. What I think we need to do as well from a government perspective is to look at transport. I was talking about some of the North Wales issues and improving Shotton as a proper interchange as well as those east-west links. What I think we should also do is abolish the 7 tolls. Frankly, it is a tax on doing business in Wales. They were meant to end by 2018, and it's absolutely disgraceful. The Conservatives announced they're going to continue with a very significant toll even after the cost of building the Southern Bridge has been paid back. So we would abolish those tolls, paying for it by a reduction in the spending and the climate change projects now going up by 50% to 73 million next year. It's wasting money on the sort of budgets where actually you can't make that sort of difference, but you're spending that taxpayers' money, and at the same time always looking to add to regulation, increasing the complexity of doing business in Wales. We think that is a mistake. Government should support transport, it should support research and education, but it shouldn't be micromanaging business by trying to pick winners or regulating business out of existence. That's really important.
Andrew Davies, let me bring you in on that. You obviously were mentioning about the tolls there, but more generally on the issue of getting that balance right.
Well, if I can deal specifically with the tolls, it is important, and I appreciate Mark has highlighted some climate change regulations and budget lines that he'd like to get rid of, but actually to continue running the 7 bridges on an annual basis, you'd have to find 15 to 20 million pounds a year, because that's the annual maintenance of keeping both bridges going. But importantly, if you did get rid of tolls on the bridges, and the Chancellor's made significant announcements on this to reduce the tolls substantially going forward, you would have a 25% spike in traffic on the M4. Now, if you're not signed up to the M4 Relief Road, how are you going to deal with the 25% spike in traffic that's going to be using that Bringlass tunnels and around Newport? You can't have it both ways, you can't, and you have to indicate to people, especially here in North Wales, if you're saying you're going to put more money on the table for North Wales, but yet you're not going to spend projects in South East Wales, how are you going to deal with that situation?
By building the blue route, which is a lot cheaper and can be done more quickly.
Most people fully understand that there is a cost to running that vital bit of infrastructure, but we all agree that the tolls are too excessive. The Chancellor's cut the toll, or will be cutting the tolls in half, and that's a vital contribution to economic activity in South East Wales and indeed across the whole of South Wales.
On that balance question.
But on the balance question, I think it is vital that there is an easier access to finance, in particular for small and medium-sized businesses. We've also had a long-standing policy on business rates as well, that businesses with a rateable value up to £12,000 would not pay business rates and be tapered up to £15,000. As a businessman myself, I fully get it that businesses keep that money within their businesses and invest that by either creating more employment opportunities or buying new equipment for that business to become more competitive. And it is important that apprenticeships and also educational in HE and FE are readily available right across the age spectrum, so we can have a workforce that is geared to the economy of the 21st century and can retrain, can reskill. But it is vital that we do not go back to the days when Plaid Cymru were in coalition with Labour and they decimated the inward investment arm of the Welsh Government, shutting the offices around the world, that actually saw our take of inward investment drop to 27 successful inward applications in 2010-2011. We do need a mixed and balanced economy, and ultimately we do need to be assisting small and medium-sized businesses. That's getting finance into those businesses, that's giving a regulatory environment around business rates that is favourable to those businesses, and that's offering training and apprenticeships to people who wish to seek retraining and offer a workforce that's fit for the 21st century. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is important we have an international presence and we do attract inward investment that has historically been so successful for Wales.
Edwina Hart, you've been responsible for that balance for the last few years. I imagine you think we're getting it right?
Well, I think this is important. We do have a balance between inward investment and what we do to help growth in the local economies with existing businesses. We had record inward investment in 14-15, 9,600 jobs, nearly 10,000 jobs, and that is very good figures. But it's important to recognise that a lot of jobs are created by small businesses. And if you look at the fact if they were to take on one more person, what they could do within local economies. So it's important that we do help. And I think access to finance, where I do agree with Andrew, is actually critical. I don't accept your criticism of Finance Wales. I think it's developing properly. It will be establishing itself as a development bank. It's done very good work in terms of its micro-business and its SME loans. It's been very successful. And I think that we will drive forward on that. In terms of business rates, we've got our manifesto commitment to help in terms of business rates, which I also think is important. But there are other key issues to help business as well, and that is education and training. We've got to have the right balance of what is required in terms of education and training. And a lot of work is done by FE and HE about what the requirements of industry want. And the approach that we've taken in the way that we've got the sectors developing is we've actually had a direct discussion within the creative, within life science, what type of skills that business need and require. And we have adapted our training priorities to take those, I think, very much into account. But also another key area for me, which hasn't come yet, is the development of entrepreneurs. The whole point is there's an awful lot of people out of there, they've got an awful lot of good ideas, and how do you ask them to make the idea? When they're in university, they've got a spin-off, we can do something about that, help and assist them, take the risk perhaps, because we do have a fund that actually takes risks in helping people to establish businesses. But we've got to get the spirit encourage of entrepreneurship, and I want to do well in at a young age. So the work that we're doing in schools with entrepreneurs is very important, giving people the confidence to make business decisions. And at the end of the day, doing more in universities to increase R&D. But there is one area I think we've got to recognise. If the government does intervene with any sort of loan or any sort of grant, there is a risk attached to it. And Leanne was talking about an equity investment, which I don't demur from. But I can just imagine what it would be like with the Wales Audit Office when we've got people making decisions about us taking an equity investment into a business when we're developing the business. Now I can see where that would be going. We've only got to look at some of the reports that have already come out from the Audit Committee and the Wales Auditor, who doesn't want us to take any risk at all. But if you are prepared to take risk, and which I agree with taking managed risk to help businesses, we should all collectively sign up to that, because it's important government has support when it takes those elements of risk.
But giving grants is a bigger risk again, because you know then, once you give a grant, whether the company fails or succeeds, you're not getting any money back.
The failure rates are very small when you look at them in real terms. And in terms of loans, the failure rates have been very small. We've got to recognise some businesses in life, there'll be 10 good ideas, right? As far as I'm concerned, if one good idea does very well, the other 9 might not do so well. If they pick them up themselves off the floor and go and develop another ideas and those are successful, that's the type of entrepreneurial culture we should be encouraging. And we're not doing that at the moment, in my opinion, to the extent that we should be doing.
Kirsty, can you come in on this? Where do you stand on that balance and whether it's right at the moment, and what will the Lib Dems do about it?
Well, first of all, I feel very rude because the person who answered the question is sitting behind us, and I feel very rude speaking forward when the gentleman is behind us. So please forgive me. We do need a balance, because what we have to remember is many of those large international companies that base themselves here then create supply chains, which have a huge benefit to small local businesses. So let's not be, let's not perfect be the enemy of good. We have got to recognise that. What we would like to see is indeed a more responsive service for small businesses. I meet very often with small businesses in my own community who find it quite difficult to get a timely response from Welsh Government. And fair play to the Minister, when she's aware of that, she jumps to and she makes sure her officials, but not every business thinks about ringing their assembly member, who then nags the minister. So we need a consistent response, and I think we need to develop. We'd like to see the development of a Welsh Development Bank, which would have a small business administration as part of that, and an international office as part of that, and an infrastructure bank to levy and lever in better resources for infrastructure. On the grounds of infrastructure, we've been talking about big spends on the M4 and the A55. You could be in the middle of Wrexham and you can't get super fast broadband, and don't get me started on mobile phone signals around the area. Absolutely woeful. So we need to get the basics right for small businesses to succeed. We need to get the basics right. No disrespect to the FE and the university sector, but if we're brutally honest, and the FE sector would recognise this, too many of our students at 16 are leaving school, and FE is often picking up the pieces. We have to get our education system right from day one. And we have too many of our young people who are leaving school at 16 without the requisite skills to make their way in the world. And we have to recognise that, be honest about it, and do something about investment in education. And finally, there is one part of inward investment I think we do need a new focus on, and that is tourism and the tourism sector, because those are people I do want coming to Wales and I do want them spending their money here. And we have not been as good as we could be in supporting the marketing of Wales as a destination, and there's much more to be done, and I think we could be much more skillful and fleet of foot in actually marketing Wales and the tourism sector.
Okay, we are running out of time. We've only got 10 minutes left, unbelievably, so I'm going to bring a couple of questions together that I think are linked. So first of all, could we have Jennifer Langley's question?
What plans does your party have to improve the business support in Wales? And I must say here that my son, who's photographed behind you, was very keen on this question.
So that's what plans do you have to help with business support? I'm also going to bring in Gwyn Evans, who has a sort of similar question or a linked question.
Diolch yn fawr, thank you. As someone with a business that pays business rates, what would your party do to reform business rates and other taxes over the next 5 years?
Andrew R.T. Davies, let me bring you in on that one first.
Yeah, well, if I can go to the business support question first of all, I mean, ultimately, we want to get an arm's length organisation running business support from Welsh Government. We do believe that it was a big mistake in getting rid of the Welsh Development Agency that dealt with many of these issues historically, and then flowing out of that the Welsh Tourism Board and other arm's length organisations that were industry-led at the end of the day. I'm a huge believer in that most of the answers can be found by the people, the men and women who run the businesses, the length and breadth of Wales, and working with those businesses, we can put a lot of support in place, but not dictate that support. And I heard a terrifying figure the other day of Careers Wales, for example, only has 40 advisors across the whole of Wales, potentially advising 180,000 people who require career development advice or career advice. And as someone who's got a son going his A-levels at the moment, that does terrify me, to be honest with you, because that advice, that information, that support is vital for young people deciding where they want to go. And importantly, if businesses want to access grants or support, they need to be able to make sure that they can get that advice, they can get that support to develop their businesses rather than be left in limbo. And so we would be creating an arm's length organisation outside of government, led and run by businesses to give that advice and support. Again, going back to our policies, back to our principles of devolving responsibility out from Cathays Park rather than thinking all the solutions reside within Cathays Park. I've touched on the business rates policy that we do have. It's a long-standing policy of ours of having business rate relief up to £12,000 for businesses and tapered up to £15,000. I have to say that parties across this table have voted against us time and time again in the Assembly for the last 7 years now, when that policy has been brought before them. And I do know that some parties have decided to take on that policy, but regrettably, when it comes to the vote, haven't supported us in that. That is one direct benefit that we would see going to businesses, because as I said in my earlier comments, I do believe that businesses retain that money and spend it within the businesses. As someone who was self-employed myself before I went into politics, you invest in the business to create the business for the future, especially if you have sons or daughters coming on behind you, like many small and medium-sized businesses do have. In respect, I think you might have been referring to income tax powers. Those income tax powers obviously will be tied up in the next Wales bill that will be coming forward, that has been pressed the pause button at the moment, and so obviously we're not quite sure when those responsibilities will be coming to the Assembly.
But we keep it on. I think we can go off onto various different tax on income tax policies.
I think what's important to know is that those responsibilities will be coming to Cardiff Bay during the Fifth Assembly, and we will be making sure that we will be the party of low taxation, because actually if you have low taxes, you stimulate economic growth, and that to me is vital to increase entrepreneurs here in Wales.
Leanne Wood, we've only got a few minutes left, honestly, so if we can keep it focused on, the bread and butter issue for many of these people in this hall, business rates and business support.
Yeah, well, we are also have been convinced of the need to reform business rates, and we want to take more businesses out of paying business rates altogether, so to increase the rate relief. 70,000 businesses under our plans will pay no business rates at all, and a further 90,000 businesses will have some form of tapered relief, and that will mean that 80% of all Welsh businesses will have some support. And we believe that this is important because if small businesses are given a little bit of extra financial support, it enables them to stay in business, perhaps even to take on extra staff, and that contributes to tackling the unemployment problem that we talked about earlier on. On this point about business support, I think that's a point very well made, and I think more can be done at a much younger age with people. At the moment, our school system is designed really to send young people off into academia, into university. Half of the kids are never going to be that way inclined. We should do much more with that group at age 14 to encourage them to become entrepreneurs. So if we give them some good vocational grounding at that age, but couple it with business skills, we're then equipping our young people to set up manufacturing businesses, energy generation companies, but we're giving them the skills right at the very beginning of the process. And I think if we do that, we'd see a big change within a generation.
Mark Reckless, again, the bread and butter issues, business rates, business support, what is UKIP's plan?
There's been some excellent bread and butter work by the Federation of Small Business on this, and I have to say their idea of a sort of one-stop small business service is attractive. And for my part, I just feel that sort of business people are going to be much better at overseeing and running and being the provision of that advice than you're ever going to get from politicians and civil servants. So I do think we need to look at that. On business rates, I think that the elephant in the room, frankly, on this is what was announced just within the last few weeks for England. And Andrew's gone through his sort of policy as to what they'd like to do, but it is very small beer compared to what's just been announced for England, taking a huge number of small businesses out of business rates entirely. My concern is that that seems to have been paid for in England by a huge raid on local government budgets, and in Wales we therefore face the possible unlevel playing field of how do at least the more mobile businesses could compete given the higher business rates. And I think the only way to do that, to actually give real relief for lots of small businesses, is for savings in budgets elsewhere. I've just mentioned the 73 million on climate change projects, but I think we need a lot more than that. If you are going to give relief to small businesses, I think we have to appreciate that is going to have to involve savings and efficiencies elsewhere.
Edwina, Hart?
Yeah, well, I'm in the business of not destroying our planet, so I think it's important we look at issues like climate change and all those, and also recognise the importance of the green economy and sustainability in everything we do, which the parties are actually signed up to in terms of the Assembly on the particularly broad agenda. In terms of business rates, our new offer would extend the tapered band to 15,000. We've been persuaded of this. This will put additional resources will have to be found for the current schemes worth about 98 million. This is about 113, 115 million. So we are putting our money where our mouth is in terms of the manifesto. In terms of business support, I think Business Wales is developing apace. I think it does provide good support. We've put resources in, but there is a point about who knows where they are. And this is an issue, but this is also an issue for business organisations as well. There's actually a role for the Federation of Small Businesses and what you publicise to your members. Do you want to do more joint working with business about showing where Business Wales is, where you can go? So I think there is a job to be done on that particular issue. But I was very interested in the discussion about young people that was brought in on this. I presented awards to primary schools who have this, they have enterprise troopers go out to the schools, and the children really enjoy it, and they develop projects, they make money for their school. And when you see them at primary age, what they can think and do, what worries me, where's that entrepreneurial spirit? Where does it get knocked out of them in the system? Because they can think of it 10 or 11. How do we make sure they're thinking about it at 14, 15? So we are doing a lot of work within the secondary sector as well on this to encourage business. And of course, we can take that role forward then into FE. Because if they've got a good basic education, they've got good ideas, let's not close them down. Let's encourage mad thoughts, because at the end of the day, mad thought could make you a multimillionaire. But I have to take one issue with you, Andrew. You're the party of low taxation you wish to be. Well, you certainly are, because when multinationals don't pay and globals don't pay any tax, you give them sweetheart deals from Treasury. So you're probably right in your comment.
I would suggest we're taking more money off those companies than Labour did in the time that they were in government, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay, we'll go back with the last word, I think, with business rates and business supports with Kirsty Williams.
We've spent the last 17 years in devolution and judging our success by how much money we've put into something, and actually we need to start looking at the outputs. What do we get for that money? We're spending a lot of money on business rate relief. How can we ensure that we get the best value for growing the Welsh economy out of those changes to business rates? I'd like to see business rates removed from plant and machinery from rateable value. I'd like to establish a 50% relief fund for new occupants of a retail business to try and revitalise our high streets and incentivise people to go in and take over an empty shop. We need to build in an automatic tapering system and more regular revaluation systems so business rates truly reflect the state of the market. But let's face it, if we give lots and lots more money on business rate relief, the people who own the buildings will just up your rent. And I just don't know whether it'll actually deliver really good value for people's businesses. And this point, which I didn't get to make last time, about devolving business rates whole lock, stock and barrel to local authorities. That might be wonderful if you're living in Deeside or you're living in Cardiff, but it will just reinforce the divide. Because in my county, we're net benefactors of the fact that we don't pay that much in, but we get more back when it's redistributed. And you're in danger of actually just continuing to build that divide between where there is a strong business rate tax base and where there isn't. And you need to be very, very careful that you don't do that and be mindful of that when developing a system. There's a role to play for local authorities in economic regeneration. I get that, and I want to give them the powers to do things. But let's be very careful before we hand it all over to them, because it will just reinforce the divides we have in the Welsh economy.
Well, I promised that I would finish on time. I have delivered. There's a message for all of you. I'd just like to thank the panel: Mark Reckless, Leanne Wood, Kirsty Williams, Edwina Hart, and Andrew R.T. Davies. And also just to thank the FSB for hosting this event and for putting it together as well. Also, thank you finally to our audience in Swansea who have come along, and even though we have been facing away from you, we have been listening with interest to what you've been saying. Thank you very much.